But you know, go.
What is going on, Belly Up Sports fan? It's your favorite history teacher, Mr. Parker Ainsworth, here at another edition of F in Sports, the podcast where teachers grade sports' biggest issues. We're moving in the direction of more frequent and shorter episodes here on F in Sports. So today is going to be kind of a quick snippet. We have a section that is dedicated just to Gold Stars and Detentions, and then 2 short theses to follow. So without further ado, let's dive in. First gold star has to go to Klay Thompson, right? I mean, has anyone else ever been through that many leg injuries, that much devastation from an injury standpoint over the course of 2 years, and made his way back to the floor for the Warriors this weekend? Now, in all honesty, full moment of transparency, peek behind the curtain. This is being recorded before the Warriors take on the Cavaliers on Sunday night, which is slated to be Klay's debut. So if he plays really, really well, we'll go ahead and say, yay, hats off to him. And if he doesn't, I'm going to go ahead and say, honestly, just that he's able to get on the floor and run around and be Klay Thompson is phenomenal. And in the unfortunate situation that we've jinxed him and something awful happens, I'm really, really sorry, Klay. But I'm really, really happy to watch Klay. Now, I say that as the show, people that listen to the show often know, a Rockets guy that has had his heart gutted by Klay Thompson. Everyone remembers 2019 Game 6, because of the Steph Curry shot at the end of the game. What they don't remember necessarily is that Game 6, Klay was in full effect in the first half of the game. That's the only reason that game was even close. Steph Curry did not score a point in the first half of the basketball game, but Klay Thompson was over 20 himself, and thus the Warriors stayed close. Steph Curry takes over in the second half, and that game becomes that game. Had Klay Thompson not done that, Steph Curry probably doesn't get that Game 6 out. Who knows what happens in Game 7. Speaking of Game 7, everyone remembers Game 7, over 27 threes the year before, all that kind of stuff against the Warriors. Game 6 Klay was also in full effect the game before. Everyone thinks about Game 6 Klay being a thing against the Thunder or a thing against the Cavaliers, but Game 6 Klay was in full effect the game before as well. He's gutted myself a couple of different times. Shouts to Warriors fans for getting their guy back. It is always more fun to see Klay play, as much fun as it is to see him on Instagram on things like boats. Second gold star is going to go to Dak Prescott. For those who missed the news over the weekend, Dak Prescott broke the single-season Cowboys passing touchdown record. Now, I know people are saying, well, there's 17 games and there was only 16, except that if you remember, with an injury, Dak Prescott actually only played 16 games this year, and he actually played hurt for a couple games after that. So Dak Prescott's record is as true to the game as it gets. Shout out to Dak for being the face of the franchise right now, as the franchise is back on an uptick. Dallas did have a 4,000-yard passer in Dak Prescott, 1,000-yard rusher in Ezekiel Elliott, 1,000-yard receiver in CeeDee Lamb, a 10-plus sack guy in Micah Parsons, and a 10-plus interceptions guy in Trevon Diggs. That's quite a roster. That's quite star power in Dallas and Jerry World. Shout out to the Dallas Cowboys. Here's to hoping that they can hopefully carry it forward for at least more than a round or two of the playoffs. We'll see how things go. Next gold star is going to Boogie Cousins for signing the big deal in Denver. Boogie, much like we mentioned with Klay Thompson, has been up and down with a bunch of different lower body injuries himself. It's great to see him back on the floor. He did get waived earlier in the week from Milwaukee, but it's good to see him back in Denver, and him playing off of Jokic and the passing ability that is there ought to be a lot of fun. Both big men are passing the ball quite well these days, and so I'm excited to see what that very poor defensive, but very fun offensive front court will be doing. Shout out to Boogie Cousins, always a good time. Speaking of guys coming back in the NBA, we've got to give a big old gold star to Lance Stevenson. If you missed it, Lance Stevenson is coming back to help out his old franchise on a 10-day contract amidst different COVID protocol things amongst other players. Lance had 30 points in his debut against the Brooklyn Nets, followed up a couple days later with 14 assists, setting the high for any player this season in Indiana. Mark Stein has reported that the Indiana Pacers look to keep Lance Stevenson for the rest of the year. He's playing in old school and one shoes like his first time around in the NBA. Shouts to Lance Stevenson for bringing it back and the air guitar. It's a bunch of fun. The NBA is more fun when guys like Lance are getting to be Lance. Our first detention is going to go to Joe Judge. For those who don't know, Joe Judge is the head coach of the New York Football Giants. The Giants finished the season 4-13 And in last place in the NFC East, this is just Judge's second season in New York. But worth pointing out that they've been abysmal in both years. And while I guess the first year you could blame on the big injury to Saquon Barkley, it's hard to figure out how this team is supposed to be better next year looking at the roster as it stands. I have to say that this attention mostly comes to Joe Judge's doorstep because of a QB sneak called on 3rd and 9 with 5 minutes left in the second quarter. Because here's the deal. I cannot think of a coach's call that would be more clear in punting on the situation and not trying to win games or not trying to win plays than a QB sneak. They were backed up onto their own 3. And I guess I understand how you're clearing out a little bit of space to get a punt off or something like that. But at the end of the day, in the second quarter, and you're on the 3, not on the half-inch line, you need to be aiming to get first downs on 3rd and 9. I don't think that's that crazy. Even if you did the trend across the NFL right now, where on 3rd and 9, you throw a 6-yard crossing route and hope that he cuts upfield for 3 more yards, which is its own thesis someday potentially. I have to say that Joe Judge, you got to go for the first down there. I also give this to Joe Judge because after firing Jason Garrett mid-year, Freddie Kitchens, I guess, is the interim offensive coordinator. But at the end of the day, that kind of a call has to be tied back to Joe Judge, especially if it's on an interim OC, because you can't think that an interim OC is going to punt on any forward progress at that point in the game. And for those that are listening to this and have not seen the play, well, what's the big deal? The quarterback, Daniel Jones, can run, or whatever you want to say. This was not spread him out, run a quarterback draw, see if you can trick him kind of play. They lined up in an old inverted wishbone type look with 2 up backs next to Jones and 1 guy behind Jones and just went full wedge forward. There was not zone stepping, there was not pulling, there was not trickeration. This was full speed ahead forward for all of maybe a yard before eventually punting. Kind of like the Giants are going to punt on Joe Judge. Second detention of the week is going to go to ESPN, or at least to their Twitter guy. And for this, I think you need to make sure you go to Jasmine L. Watkins' tweet on January 5th at 7:02 I guess I should say 7:02 Central Time, 8:02 Eastern, because that's where this really stems from. For those who don't remember, last week, Dirk Nowitzki had his big jersey retirement ceremony, and it was a lot of fun and a great way to honor Nowitzki. They built an interesting statue for him to go in front, but seeing Nowitzki's jersey lit to the rafters was a really special moment for the franchise, and frankly, for the last player of a bygone era, right? 21 years on one team. Well, we can talk about how the last few years might have been to his team and his own detriment. 21 years on one team is nothing to smirk at. That's a long, long time of dedication to one team, especially when, theoretically, somewhere between that first run that they almost got a title and that run that they did get a title, it would have been easy to blow up the team and move on. One of the famous Dirk Nowitzki stories is that his wife would always cook him pregame meals. And so there's all these interesting, funny pictures that frankly show the giant change in fashion trends between when he was drafted and the time he retired over the course of that 21 years, where he is walking into the arena, the American Airlines Center here in Dallas, with a small to-go plate covered in aluminum foil, just like any other man on his way to work that took in lunch from his wife that day. It's funny because it's so like nostalgic and familial and like feel good. And Jasmine L. Watkins tweeted out that it's hard to pick just one to-go plate, and showed 4 different pictures of Dirk walking into the stadium with his to-go plates. To which the ESPN account, shortly thereafter, tweeted out the same 4 photos in slightly different order, with the same 4 plates of food, again, slightly different order, and tweeted Dirk Nowitzki pulling up with a food plate as opposed to a to-go plate, I guess, on game day was legendary. Now, I'm not saying you can't repost and reuse other people's materials, but as a history teacher and as a person on Twitter that is frequently retweeting other people, you do need to cite your sources. There is no mention of Jasmine L. Watkins here on this at all. Worth pointing out that Jasmine L. Watkins is a great follow at Jasmine L. Watkins on Twitter. Half of the You Late podcast, really fun podcast. But man, that's a big swing and a miss out of the ESPN Twitter staff. You got to at least cite your sources, at least say where the idea came from. So big detention to them there. All right, this last detention strikes a particularly personal chord. So if you don't remember last weekend, the Houston Rockets had this big blow up at halftime where Christian Wood didn't want to go back in the second half, and Kevin Porter Jr. leaves, and blah blah blah, and they're looking to spend for a game, and Houston loses that game to Philadelphia because both those guys are out. The next game is on Wednesday night, and Kevin Porter Jr. comes in the game, has a very so-so game, right? Christian Wood probably has a better game, but as the clock is expiring, Kevin Porter Jr. has a step back first of all, he runs a pick and roll, or pick and pop, I should say, with Jalen Green, gets a switch onto Neto, there's a nice little in and out, step back to his left side, left-handed three-pointer for the win, balls goes through at the buzzer. I'm watching this on the Rockets broadcast, and I have to admit that the Rockets broadcast team is going nuts. It's a great time, blah, blah, blah. Shortly thereafter, I get sent an ESPN link with the Washington Wizards play-by-play, to which the Washington Wizards announcer, whose name is Glenn Consor, decided to say as Kevin Porter Jr. is running on the court celebrating, that Kevin Porter Jr., quote, pulled that trigger like his dad. Now, for those that just think that's a weird thing to say, on top of a number of different things, Kevin Porter Jr.'s father was arrested shortly before Kevin was born for manslaughter, and then manslaughter involving a gun. Obviously, manslaughter means lack of intent, but that's not a great thing. The other thing to point out here is that when Kevin Porter Jr. was 4 years old, being the number he chooses to wear, he wears 3 with the Rockets because 4 was taken when he showed up, but chooses to wear number 4 across his time with USC, Cleveland, and in high school, and so on. Kevin Porter Jr. was 4 years old when his dad was shot and killed in the Seattle area. And generally speaking, trigger references around Kevin Porter Jr. has had a tough upbringing and has had a rough life before the NBA are never great, but especially when they tie that directly to this awful moment of his life. For what it's worth, if you want to believe Glenn Consar and all this stuff, he did the next day issue a public apology, or plea for an apology, I should say, because he says he's reached out to Kevin Porter for apology on Twitter, in which he says he was referencing and assumed that Kevin Porter Jr.'s father was the Kevin Porter that played for the Washington Bullets in the 70s and 80s, which does not track for a couple of different reasons. First, that Kevin Porter was not a shooter. Across the board, if you look at his shooting statistics, they're mundane, even for the era. At best, Kevin Porter was really more of an athlete, it appears. And I'm not going to act like I was alive to watch, but does not come off as a sharpshooter, even relative to his contemporaries. And so shooting like that would not be a reference you make if you watched that guy play. And 2, if you're a Wizards announcer and you think the starting point guard for the team coming to visit you is the son of some guy that played for your franchise, you should probably Google that before the game. For instance, if I were calling play-by-play with the Rockets and I thought there was some connection between Evan Mobley and Cuttino Mobley, I'd go Google it. If I thought that someone was coming in that was related to Ralph Sampson, former Houston Rocket from the same time period, I'd go Google it. This is not the kind of thing that you're admitting to. The best case scenario here, if you're Consar, is that you are bad at your job. A funny story here is I'm on some different Houston Rockets Twitter back channels, and so I DM one guy and we start talking in a group chat or whatever, and next thing you know, this guy tweets this is messed up, and then LeBron tweets the one guy, and not to say anyway, LeBron retweets the one guy, Bretto goes nuts on it. LeBron eventually, I think, actually gets out the apology from Glenn Consar, so shout out to Bretto for getting that done. Bretto NBA is a great follow if you're a fan of all things Houston or all things South, so shout out to Bretto for getting the word out on that one. But man, that's just, if the best case scenario you're admitting to here is that you're really bad at your job, that's a bad sign. This is not the first time someone on the Washington Wizards play-by-play has done something kind of questionable. Obviously, a year ago, we had the issue where they were calling Ben Simmons the most overrated player in the league. While Russell Westbrook's in there shooting free throws, don't get me started. But Consar has not been there forever, but the Wizards have had a number of different moments over the course of the last 5 or 6 years, and it's just interesting that they seem to keep happening, and it's interesting that your best defense is, I repeat, I'm bad at my job. How long do you get to be bad at your job before that job is no longer your job? All right, so we got a fun show in here today. After our Gold Stars and Detentions, we're going to dive into 2 theses that frankly are kind of just out there for funsies. One, we're going to talk about Russell Westbrook and his turnovers because that was a hot topic this week. And heading into the Sunday night game, we're going to talk about the idea of a tie in the NFL. So without further ado, let's get started. All right, so this thesis reads, the Russell Westbrook turnover issue is overblown. Hear that? I'm going to be honest. That gets a D. Not quite an F, but needs some work to be eligible to play this season. All right, so the thesis reads that the Russell Westbrook turnover issue is overblown, and I gave that a D. Now, it's worth pointing out that thus far in the season, Westbrook has had more than 5 turnovers in 12 different games. He's only played in 40 games, so it's more than 1 every 4 times he's hitting the floor. He's good for more than 5 turnovers. Now, to his credit, in the last, 3 weeks, he's only broken 5 turnovers 3 times. So I guess technically he's, whittling that away as the season goes on and he's getting more comfortable. But here's the real thing with Russell Westbrook, is these turnovers add up to being part of the problem with finding an offense that he and the team can both be successful in. I got a full year of this experience myself as a Rockets fan. I got to see, I was going to say all 82, but I guess it wasn't quite 82 games that season. It was the 2020 season shortened by COVID where they went to the bubble. But here's the deal for Russ, is that he is ineffective off the ball. He is not, as a backdoor cutter, he occasionally makes defense pay and gets great lob dunks and those kinds of things, but you need to have a lot of shooting on the floor for that to work. The way the Rockets did that and the way the Lakers have helped orchestrate that, and some of their wins this season have been by going super, super small. You've seen the Lakers go to lineups with LeBron James at the center position. Houston, you'll remember, traded away center Clint Capella in an effort to go super, super small as well. Once you have 4 shooters on the floor around Russell Westbrook, he can be off the ball as a back cutter because his shot chart turns into more of a center shot chart. And because there's no big man down in the paint, those things are easier. Remember, it's hard to play, even with zone being allowed now in the last 20 years in the NBA, it's still hard to play off-ball defense from afar because you're not allowed to be in the lane for more than 3 seconds, and the lane is an extra foot wider on each side in the NBA, as opposed to every league any layperson would have played in. So that really is a long way away from a shooter for a guy to be standing in the lane, and Russell Westbrook can cut back door and get to the lane fairly easily. If you have a big down there, it clogs that up. That's a long way to say that Russell Westbrook has to have the ball in his hands unless you're going super small. If you're going super small, you're taking on other issues, but that's not where we're at right now. If Russell Westbrook has the ball in his hand, he's going to demand a high usage rate, because even when he passes the ball and runs an offense, his defender can immediately sag way far off. As improved as he is as a shooter over the course of his lifetime, Westbrook is still a career 30% three-point shooter. That means it takes him more than 3 shots to get a point per shot, and that is not great odds. An average defense in the NBA is 0.98 points per shot, and he's getting less than that as a 3-point shooter. That means him shooting threes is below average offense, and you have to remember that's even with the way the defenses sag off and encourage him to shoot 3-point baskets. That's really, really not great. So if he doesn't have the ball and is not currently attacking and sparking the offense on his own puncturing of the defense, they've got a real problem. But when he has the ball in his hands that much, having so many turnovers is also a problem because he's ineffective without the ball. And then when he has the ball, if he's turning the ball over that much, that often, you've got a real problem there too, because you don't want him dribbling the ball that much, having such high usage rates, if he's going to be also turning it over as often. It's a real double-edged sword. Unless you're going to somehow crown the achievement of the Russell Westbrook Quadruple-Double, which he has one of in a loss to the Thunder this season, where he had 20 points, 14 rebounds, 13 assists, and 10 turnovers. Yikes. Unless you're going to crown that achievement somehow as the Russell Westbrook, I'm not sure that you want him on the ball. But if you're going to put him off the ball, you have to go super small. That's where the Lakers find themselves in a predicament. Yes, with Anthony Davis out, they were able to go with LeBron at the 5 for a stretch of games and really dominate that way. They gave up rebounding battles in exchange for being hyper efficient on offense. LeBron played the point center role in a lot of ways. He also is interesting, operated out of the high post some, which meant that all those Russell Westbrook back cuts were off of dribble handoff type of actions with LeBron James. It was really, really interesting to watch happen. But this team's number 2, their second best player, is Anthony Davis, and he comes back very soon. In mid-December, Shams Charania of The Athletic reported that he'd be out be reevaluated, I should say, in 4 weeks. We're coming up on that 4-week mark, and if they push him back in the lineup, I'm not sure that, unless he's shooting at the degree and the rate he was in the bubble, I'm not sure they can actually go small with Davis on the floor, because while Davis stretches the floor some, he is not the kind of knockdown three-point shooter that they need to space the floor out. Currently, in their 5-man lineup with LeBron at the center, the Lakers are running lineups that have Carmelo Anthony at the, quote, power forward, because LeBron James is at the center. They'll have Stanley Johnson or Malik Monk or Austin Reeves or any of these other Wayne Ellington even played a little bit. Any of these other guys that can help space the floor and keep things wide. And then again, Russell Westbrook is technically the point guard, but also able to cut back door and become the de facto center on the shot chart in a number of ways. He pressures the defense a lot more like a center does. And that works great when you start taking out Carmelo for Davis. When you start taking out even Avery Bradley, but Malik Monk for Davis or these other guys, you're taking out guys that shoot 35% from 3 in Austin Reeves, or 39.7% from 3 in Malik Monk, or 40% from 3 this year, which is a lot for Avery Bradley, but even coming down to earth can only be a couple percentage points there. Carmelo Anthony himself is shooting 39.5% from 3, and while I know it's unlimited reps and theoretically he'd regress to his career mean, Davis is just shooting 17.9% from 3 this season. His career average is 30.4%, which is still taking off a number of percentage points from those other guys. Davis is a big, though. It shouldn't matter, except to play with Russell Westbrook off of the ball it does. And then again, we just talked about it. If you put him on the ball, those turnovers all of a sudden become the guy with the high usage rate getting all of the turnovers, right? And so this really does become a problem. I'm not sure the Lakers fix it. The reason this is a D and not an F is because there are weirdly, and I don't mean to go super intangible basketball, but there are intangible things Russell Westbrook brings. Bluntly speaking, he can take the lid off the gym at any moment with a breakaway dunk that fast breaks someone that just rattles the rim, and the entire, I'm about to say Staples Center, but Crypto.com, Staples Center, we're calling it Staples Center. The entire Staples Center goes berserk. That is inherently valuable, right? I don't mean to say that there are not things that Russell Westbrook does well. There are things he does very well. There are things he does that make him a Hall of Famer, aside from his triple-double stat sheet filling type of play. He gets those stats because he is truly 100% invested in going 100 miles an hour in all of his 36 minutes on the floor this year, right? Again, at 33 years old, with the style of play he's got and the injuries, frankly, he's had in his career, he's still playing 36 minutes per game, balls to the wall. And I think that in itself is a net positive. It's just, can he overcome those nights, again, more than 1 every 4 nights, that he's giving, I should say, the other team the ball 6 or more times. I'm not sure that's a winning formula, especially when, inevitably, if a series lasts at least 4 games, and more likely closer to 7 games for the Lakers, that's happening once or twice in a playoff series, that could in itself lose you the series, right? If he's giving the ball to the wrong team more than 6 times, twice in a series, at least, just on averages, that's going to hurt you big, big time. I think the Lakers are in trouble. And here's the deal. We can go back to the preseason, pre-everything NBA podcast. I really liked the Lakers. But for the start of last playoffs. I really think I still have trust in LeBron to get things done. But this may come down to some GM LeBron and some maneuvering here in the next 3 or 4 weeks to figure out how to fix this, because quite frankly, right now, this ain't a thing that's getting fixed.
Okay, Parker, so the thesis statement for this commercial is James Harden has the best beard in sports. What do you think about that thesis statement?
Oh, I give it an A. You know, as a Houston guy, we seem to have an affinity for our beers between guys like him, Dallas Keuchel, lots of big beards in the Houston area. What do you think about the thesis?
So I'm a Jets fan, and I absolutely love the beard that Ryan Fitzpatrick has. So maybe I would give Ryan Fitzpatrick the nod over James Harden. But you're talking to a couple of bearded teachers, and we know a thing or two about making sure that you maintain that mane. So check out the Beard Struggle. The Beard Struggle, they make oils, they make balms. They even have this heated comb to make sure that you get your beard straight so that you're looking fresh.
I know I've really enjoyed using the oil they make for my quarantine beard of sorts. It's nice and long these days, but it helps keep it nice and healthy and hydrated. And if you're listening to our show, you can use FN Sports 15 and get 15% off your oils, your balms, your shampoos, conditioners, whatever you need to use to keep your beard looking healthy.
Absolutely. Check out the Beard Struggle at thebeardstruggle.com. Whether you're just starting to grow or you have a luscious mane already, the Beard Struggle's got all the products that you need. The Beard Struggle. Feast your face.
All right. So our second and final thesis for the week reads, the NFL should not allow ties even in the regular season. Well, we're recording this right before the Sunday night game, and I have to say that currently I'm sitting very, very high on this. I'm giving this an A. Let's break down why. All right, so many, many moons ago, the NFL decided that in the regular season, after a single overtime, the game would end in a tie. That rule has been upheld as overtime has been altered several times in the last 2 decades. But I think that we're heading towards a breaking point if the Raiders and Chargers decide to. Now, again, this is being recorded before the night game on Sunday night to end the NFL regular season. However, we're kind of reaching a prisoner's dilemma. Entering the game, the Raiders and Chargers are both in the playoffs without a loss. So theoretically, a tie is not a loss, and they could kneel the entire NFL game out. They could kneel, punt, fair catch, kneel, punt, fair catch, over and over and over again until they got to overtime, and then do it all over again in overtime. And here's the deal. It actually would behoove them to do that. It gets them into the playoffs. It gets both teams in. Whereas if they start playing for real and they lose, they're out of the playoffs. Now, obviously, winning you're in is a fun situation as well, and theoretically they could both be playing for that spot. But the NFL's tie rules have allowed for this, right? If the NFL did not have a tie, you would not have teams, you don't have the Twitter sphere of sorts going around like, why don't we just kneel the ball every play? We both kneel everything. We're both in. I think there are a number of people that have pointed out that like, well, seeding is important and this and that, and what does that do to your coaching record? And if you then get bounced in the first round because you get a bad seed, what does that do for you? And I think that's all fair. I think it's worth pointing out that we would have a lot of criticisms for the teams for deciding to do that if that were the case. That's probably why this isn't a true blue A+, right? It's just an A. It's because I don't know in my heart of hearts if I could really do that. And the prisoner dilemma aspect of this is I certainly don't know if I could trust the opposing coach to do that. Now, once I saw it start happening, maybe I'd feel differently. But those first couple play calls, if I'm on defense, even if they're kneeling, I am blitzing and playing coverage and trying to get the ball back. And even if I have offense and they have said they're going to do this, I'm certainly going to at least run the ball and then punt and see what happens. I guess I see this as an NFL's problem because the NFL does allow ties. And if you check the catalog and go back, Shaka, Mr. Cummings back when he was on the show, we did have a full-on debate about the best overtime rules, and he really liked the NFL's overtime because it's playing the game. It's continuing to play another quarter of football, right? My issue is that at the end of that quarter, if it's still tied, they just call it a tie. And for this thesis, they would need to fix that. They need to have some sort of a quick shootout. In college football, in the third overtime, so after 2 scoreless college overtimes, which is its own different thing, college football just goes to alternating 2-point conversions, and you go back and forth, trying to score from the 3-yard line. How much fun is that? We got to see it happen this year with Auburn and Alabama. It's a ton of fun in college football to watch that happen because it's score after score after score after score, and it's just the right yardage to where you don't know if they're going to run a play action pass. The whole playbook is open. They could run the ball because it's just 3 yards. They could spread you out and go up the middle with the quarterback sneak. They could do all kinds of different things, and it truthfully is a lot of fun. It's super entertaining, and it gives you a winner, right? Now, college overtime before that is also, I'd argue, more fun. Mr. Cummings, if you remember back in the previous episode, many moons ago at this point, argued with me that even though it's more fun and entertaining, it's not necessarily the best way to do it. And we can disagree on that, but that's in the catalog. Go check it out. I think the deal here is that the NFL has to find some way to get rid of the tie, even if you end the overtime and go to some sort of a kicking contest or some sort of 2-point conversion contest or whatever the case may be, because ties in the regular season before this have led us to this point. The Steelers are the ones that stand to get in with their own tie from earlier this season if one of these teams truly loses. If that tie was not eligible to happen early in the season, we wouldn't even be in this scenario, right? If that if the Steelers were truly 9-8 or truly 10-7, we'd be sitting here saying, no, one of these teams has to win to get in. Instead, you're looking at 9-7 and 1 as a possibility for both teams, and they'd both have tiebreakers to get in over the Steelers, and that's the real issue here. And so as I see this playing out, I don't think, as we're recording a little over an hour before the game kicks off, that either team will sit back and tie. But this does bring up an issue that could happen at some point in the NFL's near future. You already have guys taking off all of week 18, and some took off 17 and 18 because they were fine as they were seeded, or they were fine and just getting into the playoffs, or whatever the case may be, and they'd rather get healthy. What better way to stay healthy in week 18 than to kneel, punt over and over and over again, and then you're in the playoffs anyway, right? You're kneel, punt, you're in the game, and you're not even hitting. Even your backups are not actually hitting each other, right? You're just taking a knee. The lines don't even have to click-clack. It's all over. Now, as far as solutions to this go, I think it'd be fun to watch. Again, the NFL is supposed to be about entertainment. After a scoreless overtime, instead of ending in a tie, you could do a number of things. You go to the college route and do the 2-point conversion off until you have, someone finally scores and someone else doesn't. That's fun, I guess. It does seem cheap to be copying college football. I think what could be fun, because they like to stick with the long kicked extra points, would be some form of an extra point off. Either you're kicking the extra points over and over because those are things that people miss now, or you can continue to back up field goals, like my guy kicked from the 20, your guy kicks from the 20, they both make it, then move back 10. My guy kicks from the 30, your guy kicks from the 30, they both make it, they back up 10. All of a sudden, the Baltimore Ravens look a lot better, right? They look more prepared for extra overtime. I also think it's worth saying that if they want to stick this hard-nosed football grrr stuff, they can go to a double overtime, because that's certainly what they decided, for those that don't know. In the playoffs, when you cannot have ties because someone has to move on, they do just play a second 10-minute period. I guess you could go that route. It does seem to be the kind of thing that would really beat up bodies in the course of the regular season. I don't know if you get the CBA to agree to that. There's a number of different options here. Frankly, you could have jump ball type contests. You could have, what do you want to do to get this done? But you can't keep allowing ties in the NFL, because theoretically, you've now made your Sunday night game after watching a full weekend of some meh football, right? The Cowboys blew out the Eagles. Jacksonville won a football game. Like, the Steelers are dancing, even though it's not up to them, and so on. Like, meh. You got a weekend of meh football, and you could theoretically end it with a bunch of kneels and punts. And while I don't think it will happen, I think the possibility in itself means the NFL needs to look themselves in the mirror. Friends, that was another edition of F in Sports. Do you feel like you understand the Russell Westbrook's turnover issue a little bit better? Or how about the NFL tie rules and what needs to be fixed there? Shout out to our intern Chris Sliwa for doing all the audio editing work. You can find him at Chris_Sliwa7 on Twitter. Chris is going to stick with us all spring long too, or as long as we can hold on to him. Shout out to Chris for all the help. It's really, really appreciated. If you're looking for me on Twitter, you can find my personal stuff at Ainsworth512. That's at PAINSWRTH512 on Twitter and Instagram. It's where I post things like things I'm recording, things I'm watching on TV, other podcasts I'm on, things I've been writing. I also write about the Rockets fairly frequently, so be sure to check that out every week. I write about a couple of other different NBA things too. I got a series coming out this week in which we'll be looking at why insert player needs to win the 2022 NBA title. We're starting out with Steph Curry. Yes, if you listen to the show a long time, that's my favorite, Steph Curry. And yes, that's sarcasm. But again, that's at Painsworth512 on Twitter and Instagram. PAINSWRTH 512 on Twitter and Instagram. Make sure you go check out the Belly Up site. We got a number of different basketball writers that just signed on with us. Shout out to the Hoops United Media crew. Several of them are coming over to write with us, and it's really, really exciting to see all the growth in the basketball department moving forward. As for this show, you can find this show on Twitter and Instagram. On Instagram, it is at F_in_sports. That's at F_in_sports. And on Twitter, we're building quite a following. You can find us on Twitter at FInSports2. That's FINSPORTS number 2, all one word. In both social media handles and on our Facebook page, you'll be able to find a link to our merch store, link to our different sponsors, including MyBookie and Yeti. Our merch store has a number of different things, including a charitable option every month. This month's charity, in honor of National Mentoring Month, is all donated to Big Brothers Big Sisters of America. Be sure to check out our role model t-shirts and sweatshirts online. They're really, really cool, really comfortable. I'm recording in one right now as I sit here, and I got to tell you, it's just the right warmth for this Dallas winter. Now that I say that, it's probably going to freeze this week. Let's see. Anyway, it's a great, great sweatshirt, great, great t-shirt. Make sure you check out all the good merch at FNSports2 on Twitter. Use the links to get to our store via Bonfire. Thank you all so much for checking out the show. Make sure you download, subscribe, rate, review. Give it a couple different those and a couple different outlets, including YouTube. You can find us on YouTube now via the Six Pack Coverage Network. So make sure you give all those good things a subscribe, a follow, a rate, and a good review. Thank you so much for doing all those things to help out the podcast. And remember, whatever you do when it comes to sports, don't flunk with us. Later, guys.